and it's been interesting uh, time, and I want to say thank you to everyone who continues to support me, and really special thank you to the folks that I'm able to care for, and I'm very appreciative of them and their willingness to interact with me on a medical and psychological and spiritual level to address some of the issues. And so today I wanted to kind of, I was, I guess, reminiscing or going into like retrospect mode because it always kind of lends you to the future. And so, again, I had written for a magazine um, called Mina, and uh, was able to publish a few articles. I'm going to be bringing those out in my website and kind of reliving those and then kind of adding on to them. But I was looking at this particular article I wrote. It was called "Seeking the Truth," and I said that the history and celebration of Africans in America increased from one day to 1 month. Our historical celebration in America is a selective review with limited media coverage. The theme is our faith to overcome all odds and passive resistance. What is lost in the celebration of Africans in America is the history of slavery and the level of brutality and deprivation, fear, sexual abuse, and murder that happened to us during that period of time. And so I was writing about these things because that's how I felt, and even the my cursory review of the literature, led me to kind of make these kind of observations because, again, I'm an African American clinician, and I need to kind of understand why it is that the patients that I see hurt. What's the pain, what's the trauma? Um, because in effect, how we think, you know, so shall we act, and it's almost kind of reflective of that. If you are physically sad or anxious or psychotic or depressed, then your health is not going to be, or we can't maximize, the ability to, take care of your blood pressure or take care of your blood sugar or just lead you to a better quality of life because those particular things are looming in the background and almost like manipulating the care. And so, and I went on to say, it says that an estimated 100 million were murdered in this uh, peculiar institution, slavery. We are provided safe and acceptable and predetermined snapshots of female and male heroes forced to accept a dictated, racist, secular, limited, partial, non-balanced truth. Seeking the truth starts with searching, thus the name of the article. Seeking the truth starts with searching for the most accurate record. Certain documentation tends to carry different levels of credibility. And now, with the move to GPT chat and all the information uh, that's accessible to us, we can really start to kind of understand and make some sense out of this. And I think that the problem with any of this is, how is that information colored? What are the dictates and mandates of that information? Do they what tilt do they have, or will it be just what the information and what you would make from a determination of collecting all the information together and drawing some conclusions? And so seeking the truth starts with searching for the most accurate record. Certain documentation tends to carry different levels of credibility. Credibility, or the belief in information, should be challenged regardless of form, be it visual, written, or oral. Unfortunately, the true history of Africans in America depends on which expert, religious leader, or politician in power you seek. America has had a pattern of supporting America has had a pattern of supporting or not supporting historical facts depending on a degree of tolerance in the changes in the status quo. And we can see that in this woke conversation. And, because these things affect healthcare, the perception of healthcare, how people are treated, what's the worth of a person. And so it's implicit bias in the system that needs to be understood so that you can make, intelligent decisions. And that's always will be the issue. And so I said that America uh, has a pattern of supporting or not supporting historical facts depending on a degree tolerance to changes in the status quo. In other words, if the dominating culture is comfortable with that change, then the change will take place. If not, then there's blowback, like woke, like advanced race theory, like uh, the fact that George Floyd was murdered had nothing to do with any drugs in his system or any of his character flaws or not. He did not deserve to be murdered. So, uh, viewing our history is like driving in a pouring, muddy rain with no windshield wipers. We're forced to navigate treacherous roadways in poor weather conditions. Africans in America have been provided a partial view of history on a road that has been unclear and left to the imagination. In paraphrasing the famous quote, a person without a knowledge of themselves is like a tree with no roots. It is my belief that there will be no true understanding of how past traumatic events of slavery has been and has had intergenerational psychological and physical effects on descendants of slaves of Africans born in America in the 1619s now. Because I wasn't sure of that date when I wrote this. My articles have attempted to provide information on the relationship between our mental health and physical health. Recent articles draw a relationship between heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and cancer, uh, and mental disorders such as depression. In women that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, sexual abuse is a primary factor. There are estimates that 30% of Africans that are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress after witnessing um, the 9/11 and will continue to suffer and and have chronic relapsing um, as a chronic relapsing condition. So when we talk about the comparison of the trauma and slavery, we then have to maximize that to recent events, 9/11 for that extent. I think it's the 20th anniversary of 9/11 now. And again, the trauma, the understanding something traumatic happening and it hurt people or hurt them, hurt the definitely the New York, but definitely America as a whole. Um, that's the kind of pain that needs to be understood and felt about the vestiges of post slavery America. It says, and again, I also want to draw the correlation between uh, our physical and our mental health. And when I started talking about these things, I was just really early into I guess it must have been about 10 years into my practice. And then I was making these correlations between mental health and physical health. It was an evolution. And so current literature suggests that severe trauma can trigger emotional stress and can be a leading factor in chronic mental illness as well as physical illness. And an example of misdiagnosis in the American healthcare system has been a lack of identification of mental health issues in post-Vietnam era veterans. So this is kind of unique through the healthcare system is that they didn't have a minimalist view toward mental health. Now we don't. But at the time I wrote this article, it would take me 6 months to get a referral to a behavioral health specialist, let alone a psychiatrist. Um, and so you end up as a primary care provider having to learn how to treat anxiety, depression, and not just with medicines. A lot of um, therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, relaxation techniques. Those are things that you have to learn, along with the obvious things like SSRIs and a number of the and the anxiety and depression medicines, including some antipsychotics. Uh, in promotion and the progression of civilization on this continent, wars and internal conflict have been a part of the development of the culture. Africans have not been proved any more or less violent than their European or Western counterparts, nor less family values based. There are a people in rich culture and customs that suffer from limitations, diseases, defined as epidemics, unless the country has defined into three world terms. On the shores of the African continent, we had an intact social, culture, and political and economic structure. What happened to Africans born in America? And this is not a new concept. Author Karji Wilson discussed the use of behavioral techniques to control thinking, behaviors, and actions. Examples are fear, intimidation, techniques by murder and lynching of Africans in America by white mobs. Uh, blessings uh, provided by a lack of blessings provided by a lack of enforcement of these criminal acts and validation by Americans' judges and juries in the legal system. And one of the examples of that is Emmett Till's murders went to court and were found innocent by an all-white jury. Uh, but some would say his murder was a turning point, one of the turning points in the civil rights struggle. It galvanized a whole bunch of people, along with the murder of the four young black children in the church bombings. Um, so blood, and so again, the criminal, legal, medical justice system has never afforded us the same protection as it has our white counterparts. It's changing now, but it had not always been. It had always been that way. So the Birth of a Nation, considered one of the greatest American movies, has been a significant vehicle of propaganda techniques and concepts to continue to dehumanize and criminalize Africans in America. This helped spawn the birth of racist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, and now we have the white extremists. You know, that's a reiteration of these. So this has been American. This is American as apple pie. The brutalization and attack and intimidation has been as American as apple pie. It's how things are done to keep people in their place. Um, so this helped spawn the birth of racist organizations, Ku Klux Klan, that would say white America from freed Africans in America. This mode of operation mandated these groups to promote a program of fear and intimidation to continue to surface today in 2005. So that's when I wrote this article. I wrote this article in 2005. The white supremacists that murdered the family members of the fugitives that would hear cases had a track record of putting these groups in jail for a long time. Understanding this level of trauma and lack of control requires a major shift in a new frame of thought to help us understand the state of Africans in America. There has never been free will or choice. African Americans have been taught to think and act and function in the society, and the direct result of should have been 300, but I happened 600 years of psychological trauma, uh, past and present and future. The nightmare is hard to understand. We only have written and oral history of of the two institutions called slavery. The theory is being advanced that provided explanations for mental health and physical health of Africans in America in a series of papers by Dr. George Takuri and Mafa, 10th annual conference, as well as the publication of Post-Traumatic Slave Disorder, written by three health professionals, Dr. Omar Reed and MSW Suko Simmons and Larry Higginbottom. Um, I'd asked that people get the copies, but this was in 2005. Says each discusses the concept a majority of mental and physical issues can be traced to the trauma of slavery and now defined as post-traumatic slave disorder. Miss Dr. Jakuri now has reframed it as syndrome. We should discuss its implications in further uh, discussions and education is the best medicine. So I wrote that in 2005. And I say, well, wow, what's really changed? Not that much. And I think that what's happening now, because of the media presence, because of the ability to get information very, very quickly, uh, we find ourselves in a situation where this is not, should not, and just can't stand. Um, so I was I was so we're having a little bit of a problem with streaming from Facebook. So for you, those of you that were watching me on Facebook, we'll see if we can recapture. Uh, they're trying to reconnect it. Hopefully, you'll be able to hear me. And so again, some discussions of general. This was a conversation that I had to have because again, taking care of folks um, is tough. Being a primary care clinician in the community is tough, and you have to have a really thick skin, and you have to be very understanding that folks have had to deal with a lot of trauma, and that they are hurting, and that pain, um, it's not going to go away. It's intergenerational. It's familial. So I think that it's something that we'll always have to deal with. Um, it's let's see. Anyway. So um, gee. Anyway, um, so I was talking and had been having some discussions around diversity and see here. Let's go. Where did I go? Uh, and I've been talking with folks in some clinical philosophies. Um, some of my philosophies that I have evolved have taken time for like I mean, 35 years. And it's been uh, a great journey. Um, I kind of base a lot of my care now on shared decision making and patient centered care. And my belief is that even if it costs time and I fall behind with that next person, I can only see one person at a time. I can only see the person in front of me, and I have to be present and listen to them, listen to their concerns. Um, and second. Okay, something's going on with the internet. Nothing I can do anything about. Um, so it got me to thinking about how we approach people in terms of their care, and what does that look like. Um, and it could look like a couple of things. And but again, I think that what you have to do is involve that person in their care. And that's a little bit more work than just telling them what their care should be. I always tell people do their homework. Um, and That's why I'm really, really big on heart disease. Um, and because heart disease is the number one killer of African Americans. And I'm always amazed at the number of people that I see coming back for follow up or reinstituting their care that stopped their medicines. Now, I don't have an issue with someone stopping their medicines because you have a right to take them or not take them. My concern is that um, you tell the provider, let the provider know that you've decided to not take these medicines because they bother you. They are not consistent with your values or whatever. But uh, I always tell folks that, blood pressure and heart attacks and strokes and cardiac arrest are not fun. And if two young African American athletes, Bronny James and Lamar Hamlin, can have cardiac arrest, then you know myself at 68 definitely I've got to have some structural heart disease and be at risk. So this is why we want people to engage in you know what seems to be the best literature for plant-based diets and um, um, more water and more activity and less sugar, less salt, less meat. Um, those are the things that I think are really things that we can do. That you can only control what you can control, and we can control those things. And if you can control those things, then that's what you should be doing. Um, and it doesn't even have to do with the ability of access. It has to be with how you're going to maximize this vehicle you call your body. Yeah, and it's always tough to change. Um, and My bachelor of science was in organizational behavior, and again, this is a discussion around um, understanding systems and system change and organizational structure and the interaction in organizations that create that organization's culture as well as productivity, of course. So some of the thoughts is that if you want more productive people, you make them more productive. You help them be more productive. You don't just tell them to be productive. You have a systemized way of improving productivity that everyone can understand and move forward in. And one of the concerns in healthcare right now is that we are in a productivity model, but not a care model. And so that's one of the problems with providing care as opposed to just seeing somebody. And um, the model is that you see one person with one problem, but most of the people that I see have 4 or 5 problems, including paperwork. So how does that mix with that care model? Oh, you can do it in bites and spaces, where you have the person come back at least 5 times to do what you should be able to do in 2 or 3 visits if you take the time. So again, different philosophy, different way of getting things done, different way of treating folks. Again, around this shared decision making model and patient centered care. It's a different way of doing things. It's one of the things that I think is going to be very prominent in uh, working with Conscious Voices and Dr. Green and Mosaic and the folks on the leadership team as we get ready to move this forward. And we'll talk about that more too. I'm excited about it. It's getting toward the holidays, and I want people to be cognizant of the fact that COVID is still present. Understand that, but also, really, try to control and just be intelligent about food consumption and holiday eating and drinking and all those kinds of things. Um, uh, Probably uh, being modified, is a good way to go. Um, and I want to thank all of the women that I see, and they're making real good commitments to take care of themselves. And I always say that if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. And characteristically, women of color tend to take care of everyone but themselves. And so that's one of the things that I try to emphasize in care, particularly for women, because they're the caregivers. And as I think about my mom and her caregiving, I don't know if at the end of her life, did she have anything left? She'd given so much. And I don't want my sisters to do that or my grandchildren, daughters to do that. So if you don't say something about it, then it still continues. The cycle still continues. Anyway, um, again, I want to thank Believe Radio, and want to thank Curtis for all his help with the show, and uh, we'll keep it moving. The So part of this article in 2005, uh, as I look at it and kind of reflect on it, I don't know what's not different now. I think that we are right in the midst of we're right in the midst of it's a revolution, but it's a discussion around how things are going to be, and I think that that's a tough decision for everybody. Um, it's going to require that we make some changes and talk about what we do. And I have one of the folks that led me in this direction, and was a African American physician, and she is just to say brilliant would be an understatement. Um, and she wrote this article called "Naming Racism," and it's for one of the first uh, INH National Health Service Institutes um, papers on, in her case, this was a research director on social determinants of health. So we've always talked about social determinants, food, clothing, shelter, safety, Maslow's principles. For those that know me and had these conversations, then it's kind of common knowledge that, we are reflective. Our health is not just the medical visits or the vaccinations, it's the food, it's the clothing, it's the shelter, it's the safety. It's the a feeling of a future. And so this paper was called Naming Racism. This is a dual reality, and this is from her original paper. Uh, and I want to thank her for allowing this paper to be put and published and accessible to folks like myself and the community at large. You can go and get it anywhere. It's called a dual reality. It's called a restaurant saga, and she talks about levels of racism: institutionalized, personally humiliated, and internalized. And I think that's really, really important because that's what it is. Is racism is institutional, it's personal mediated, and it's internalized. So institutionalized racism, different access to the goods, services, and opportunities of society by race, codified in social structures, processes, and values. So, in other words, it's just not equal. It's not. It's not balanced. It's not fair. And the it was as simple as white entrance versus black entrance in South Africa and in America. Segregation. Characteristics, she talks about historical, legalized, persistent, normative, including both the acts of commission and of omission. And the good doctor, again, um, tried to be clear and balanced and scientific in their nature because otherwise the paper wouldn't have been accepted for publishing. And she gave some examples of manifestations in the maternal conditions, access to power, and white privilege. And material conditions are housing, education, employment, income and wealth, access to health care, toxic dump locations, neighborhood resources. Access to power, information, health information, one's own history, resources, capital, organizational, political, voice, voting rights, representation in government, media coverage, naming racism. So we're seeing that today, you know, health information, right to one's body, determine what they want to do with their body, one's own history, woke, advanced race theory, resources, capital, organizational, political. Always the underfunding of people of color's communities and whatever you want metric you can use. And I don't justify these young folks breaking into these stores. Can't justify that. But what are the options? Have we provided options for that so that it's easier to go to school, to educate, to survive than it is to steal? I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to steal something. I just, it's just, this kleptomania has got me. I'm living too good. I need to go steal somebody else's stuff. That could be true, but I doubt that. It's always an issue of survival. Maslow's principles, social determinants, and the vote, vote, the voice, right? Voting rights, representation in government. Again, naming racism. When a one group doesn't want another group to vote, then they don't want them to have political power in their system, because that's the way of determining and having power in the system. You have to be able to vote. White privilege. White as normal, white as superior, white as raceless, sense of entitlement, invisibility of others, hypervisibility of others. Now, let me be clear. This is about racism. What constitutes racism? And if the dominant culture is white, then they determine the structure and rules of the game. Anyway, I think what I kind of draw that parallel to is uh, the White House chief of staff trying to get his case kicked up to the federal government, the feds, so they could rule on it, and probably even dismiss it. And to understand this, to me, and I may be wrong, someone can correct me, or you know, if his job was to overthrow the government, then certainly he should have his case kicked up to the federal government. If his job was not to overthrow the government, in other words, or intercede in voting rights, or to determine whether the election was um, valid, whether it was a fair election, then certainly as the chief of staff, then he was overstepping his bounds. I'm not sure, but I'm sure in the chief of staff's memos over the years had nothing about intersecting and voting, you know, free and elected voting in a particular county or state. It had nothing to do with ensuring the machines were appropriate or electing fake electors. Wasn't aware of that. So anyway, sense of entitlement. Example there. Invisibility of others or hyper visibility of others. Invisibility of others. You know, too black. Hyper visibility of others. You know, model the model race, Asian community model race, right? Indians, from India. So that's what the promotion is. Uh, that's why it's that's why on the job application it says black/African American. Black is the diaspora. Hypervisibility of one group versus invisibility African Americans of another. Measurement, distribution of resources, income inequality, right? I think that it says something that a black household makes $80,000-$90,000 less than a white household in intergenerational wealth. So it's not existent because you're too busy trying to survive. That's what kind of gets me about this Ford strike. About this auto worker strike in 2008. They gave back a lot so that the industry would survive. So now they're asking to be paid, and they're being told, "Well, you're greedy." While they made record profits and gave record benefits to the uh, upper management staff. Okay. So, measurements, distribution of resources. Again, this is back to naming racism. Distribution of risk, absence of representation. Examine current status as well as historical trends. Separation, remedies. Separation, integration, self determination, reparations, 100% inheritance tax. Race and racism in relation to class. That's one of the debates. Personal mediated racism, differential assumptions about the abilities, motives, and interests of others by race, differential actions toward others by race, prejudice and discrimination. Those are all, it's just clear. Should be clear. Again, we're naming racism. Yes, there was a INH study done on racism. And this black woman, Dr. Jones, authored it number of years ago. Number of years ago. It's nothing new. Interpersonal characteristics. Interpersonal can be unintentional. Again, racism, right? Ranges from subtle to blatant, often denied or attributed to other causes. Constitutes everyday racism. Includes both acts of commission and omission. So interpersonal. And I didn't know that. Oh, gee, I didn't know your name was N. I didn't know your name was Boy. Ranges from subtle to blatant. The murder of George Floyd. I say that because that's a visual of what's happened, man, since we got here in 1619. It's just on video now. Often denied or attributed to other causes. Hey, he was just killed because he was an African American who passed a $20 fake bill. George Floyd, right? Yeah. Anyway, includes both acts. Constitutes everyday racism. Includes both acts of commission and omission. Everyday racism is just like this is what they do. This is how they function. This is their everyday to days. You don't get anything separate from that. Manifestations: lack of respect, poor or no service, failure to communicate options, suspicion, shopkeeper vigilance. Well, if you tell me I'm going to come in there and steal, I might as well steal. Hmm. That's a deep psychology, right? A little twisted but deep. Everyday avoidance of street crossings, purse clutching, empty seats. The distressed white female who's been traumatized by a large African American man with big hands. Anyway, devaluation, surprise at competence, stifling of aspirations. Oh, yeah, I didn't know you were that smart. We went to Stanford. Yeah, I went to Stanford. Yeah, that's okay. How long have you been practicing? About 35 years. Okay. Oh, wow, it's a long time. Yeah, it is. That's how it goes. I think at this point in my career, sometimes when I walk in and see the folks that I see, they're expecting an old white male with a white coat on. That's what they're expecting. What they get is a brother with a bow tie. Anyway, scapegoating. Rosewood, Charles Stewart, Susan Smith. Dehumanization, police brutality, mention that. Sterilization abuses, hate crimes, redlining, limited educational opportunities, less resources, communities placed in right near uh, the port so you can get all the fumes and construction material and burning that you can stand. Hate crimes. Hmm. Hate crimes is interesting because it just depends on who you're talking about. Uh, I want to give a shout out to our district attorney and let her know that she is loved and she's doing a very tough job and trying to have the patience of Jove and be fair and balanced while people are screaming for blood. But that's not the law. So I like our district attorney. I would hope that no one signs that petition that think it's mean spirited and racist. Patterns of behavior measurement. Patterns of behavior, medical procedures, uh, hiring, promotion, criminal sentencing, formal discrimination complaints, double application test cases. Hmm. Acknowledge that racism is real. The remedies are acknowledge that racism is real, teach your children about racism, develop a support group, speak out on the spot, monitor outcomes by race. Debates multiculturalism versus anti racism. Internalized racism, acceptance by members of the stigmatized races of negative messages about our abilities and intrinsic worth. Characteristics not believing in any others who look like us and not believing in ourselves. Accepting limitations to our own full humanity, spectrum of dreams, right to self determination, range of self expression. Embracing manifestations are embracing whiteness, hair straighteners, and bleaching creams. Again, Barbie, right? Barbie, my grandchild would never look like Barbie. And I hope she doesn't ever. Man, again, more distressed white females, poor babies. So that's so sad. Embracing whiteness, hair straighteners, and bleaching creams. Again, the movies, right? Skin tone stratification. The white man's ice is colder. Self devaluation, racial slurs as nicknames, cultural rejection, fratricide, resignation, helpless, hopeless, school dropout, voter non participation, risk health practices. Again, all the manifestations of racism. Doll test. Well, the doll test is, they had a, they just repeated recently, got the same results. The basic the doll test was that they brought kids into room and they had one black doll and one white doll, and so they asked the kids, even the blackest kids, which one did you want? And of course, they all picked the little white doll. I don't know, of course, but they just all picked it. And then they repeat the experiment, same thing happened. That's how internalized racism can be and self hate and trauma. You know, they never thought about that. It's just how it made them feel. So, doll tests, self efficacy scales, acculturation scales, voting history, hiring, purchasing history, club memberships by skin color, dating histories by skin color. Remedies avoid the negative messages, separate within the United States, move from the United States, contact the negative messages, organize affinity groups, provide a range of role models, surrounded with positive images and teaching more complete history. Dispel negative messages. dismantle negative messages, control the media, control the schools, control what is said in families. And I guess this is the media portion where we want to have a voice, and I think the Believe Radio allows us to have a voice, and to provide another level of content from a different perspective, not just traditional debate, assimilation versus cultural nationalism, levels of racism, a gardener's tale, institutional racism, uh, in- initial historical insult, structural barriers, inaction in face of needs, social norms, biological determinism, unearned privilege. And so they point this out as two plants. One, uh, not burdened by any of the things I just mentioned, historical insult, structural barriers, inaction in the face of needs, social norms, biological determinism, unearned privilege, versus another plant that is burdened by all these constraints and personal, mediated, intentional, uh, unintentional acts of commission, acts of omission, maintaining structural barriers condoned by social norms. And they continue to show this plant, one plant not being burdened by the personally mediated racism, one and it's thriving, one is that starts to lose its plants and its roots. Internalized racism reflects systems of privilege, reflects societal values, erodes individual sense of value, undermines collective action. So again, as we see these two plants progressing, one starting to die and one just flourishing, because again, this have to work with internal racism. And who is the gardener? Government, power to decide, power to act, and control resources. Dangerous when one's allied with one. Dangerous when allied with one group not concerned with equity. That's where we're at now. They're not concerned with equity. Equity means fair and balanced. And the auto workers are not concerned with equity. Racism. You thought I was just talking about color. No. It's a determinant. Racism is all the time. Measurements Racism Working Group. Develop a conceptual framework for understanding the impact of racism on health. Review currently available measures of racism. Propose current available and new measures of racism for the use on a number of uh, organizations. Reactions to race pilot module. Earlier you told me your race. Now I will ask you about some questions about your reactions to race. One, how do other people usually classify you in this country? You would say white, black, or African American. This again is a screening test. How often did you think about race? You would say once, twice, never. You know, uh, again, uh, again, racism, right? And so, and the use of the data would be to understand racial climate and experience unfair treatment in the U.S. Raise questions about local processes that may be creating inequality, and use best practices areas as models in the terms of promoting equity, excuse me, and monitor progress toward equity. Equity, not better or worse, just fair. I think everyone can live with that. Everyone can live with being fair. Yeah. And again, racism measures are needed. Uh, and it said reaffirms that at the end of the paper, it said it reaffirms American Public Health Association policies that have condemned racism and impacts health and healthcare. And we know that it does. Comments the National League of Cities on doing racism and gender in their efforts to launch a national campaign against racism. Calls on the president and the United States to endorsed a national campaign against racism, calling Congress of the United States to convene an institute of the institute to prepare a report that summarizes our current knowledge on the impacts of racism on health and identify points of intervention. Again, back to the original issue that racism affects health and it affects the quality of health. It affects who receives health access. And we have about 4 more minutes. I want to really thank everyone for tuning in and being who they are and patient and specifically um, I just kind of soul. Thank you. And want to say hello to all my grandkids and all my family. Uh, it's been pretty intense last couple months just working. Everything takes time. And I think that, and this is, again, and from a clinical standpoint, finally, the impact of racism on health, implications for practice. We should vigorously investigate the basis of observed race associated differences in health outcomes, interpret all race related findings, propose follow up studies, view race associated differences as important clues to be mined, acknowledge that race is a social construct and not a biological determinant. I'll say that again. Acknowledge that race is a social construct and not a biological determinant, which means that it's how people think as opposed to your genetics. Acknowledge that explicitly measures the gene, explicit measures genes. There is a genetic hypothesis. Model race as a contextual variable in multi-level analysis. Acknowledge the diversity within racial groups. Explicitly measure culture if there is a cultural hypothesis. Collect information on ancestry, migration, history, and language. Acknowledge the association between race and social class and association between perpetuated by institutional racism. Acknowledge the association between race and social class and association uh, explicitly there is a social class hypothesis. I want to thank you for taking the time and for my folks on the Facebook page, I'm sorry we lost our internet connection. Uh, that's not good, but we'll be okay. I want to thank you for tuning in to uh, Education is the Best Medicine. Next week will be Miss Howard and her time, Eyes Conscious Soul. And again, I want to thank you folks for listening in and thanks for all the support and just all the things that you do. Want to say a special thank you to again my family and all those that make this possible. And we'll be signing off. Thank you very much.